This morning, our message is coming from Senator Eric Giddens, who spent 10 years in the legislature the past 4 months. And he's going to give us some thoughts, and then he's going to talk for a while, and then we'll give you a chance to ask questions. So, Eric, welcome. Welcome to our church, and I think welcome to the legislature that always turned my anger up when I read it in the newspaper, and it's not your fault. So you're on.
Thank you, John. It's really great to be here with you and Mary Kay and Ken here in person in the sanctuary, and with all of you online. I've really enjoyed listening to all the joys and concerns and announcements, and being connected to you all here again. And yes, I think I do have a few more gray hairs at the end of this session than I probably did at the beginning, but it is an honor to be able to do this work and to represent our community and the Iowa Senate. I take that role seriously. I've learned a lot. I haven't had what I would consider to be a normal experience or session yet. Minority party or not. My first session, 2019, I only had the last 5 weeks of the legislative session to experience. So learned where the bathroom was and a few other important things by the end of that session. And then 2020 was what we know it was for everybody, with a disrupted and suspended legislative session that we went back in June just to kind of wrap up and do some very important things to get us through the pandemic, continuity of state government type actions. And then 2021 was a full-length session, but we still had a lot of COVID protocols in place and everything. So still looking forward to an actual sort of normal experience. I feel like we're starting to feel some of that again in our community just in the last couple of weeks. I wish I was here in front of a room full of people, but maybe we'll get back to that kind of experience at some point. So as far as the legislative session goes, I guess I'll do my best to give you some highlights here in the next few minutes. And then I think the format is going to be for us to try to take some questions and respond to what folks who are listening would like to talk about. So I look forward to that part just as much as me speaking. So yes, it was what I would consider to be a rough session. Lots of things that were not priorities for my side of the aisle. I try to not be political as best I can. Or partisan, I should say, but it's hard to ignore that aspect of it, especially in a session like this. So I'll start with a few things that we do consider to be good things, so that we can kind of have that component to it as well. There was good, solid funding, I'd say, for a rural broadband program. That's probably the top bipartisan thing that happened, I'd say, this session. $100 million appropriated for expansion of broadband into rural areas across the state. We like that. There were three measures to improve childcare access in the state, and two of them we would consider to be pretty good things, a step in the right direction, maybe not as ambitious as we might like to see, but good things. One of them is phasing out eligibility. So you may have heard of the child care cliff effect, that when you earn more money, you're all of a sudden ineligible for child care assistance. Instead of it just dropping off now your eligibility is going to phase out over time. That's a step in the right direction. There's an increase in eligibility for child care tax credit to help families in that way as well. There's also an increase in the number of children that an unlicensed center can have. That's the one we're a little concerned about. We'd prefer the regulation over our child care centers. So telehealth parity, that's something I know, John, you've worked hard on mental health issues here in our community for a long time. So it will expand access to mental health services in rural areas where people often are far from, a mental health provider. So they can now use telehealth services, and the providers will be reimbursed at an equal rate as in-person services. So that's a good thing. Our food banks have been fighting for a long time for a sales tax exemption for items that they purchase, durable items. They currently have to pay sales tax on those things. This is a really meager thing that will only cost, quote unquote, cost the state about $250,000 a year, but will provide an additional 1 million meals to our most needy people across the year by exempting food banks from sales tax. I wrote this down. I hadn't had it on my list, but Sherry Huber-Otting mentioned her e-bike. We passed a law to add some regulations for e-bikes. Those are becoming more popular now. So I'm ranking member of the Senate Transportation Committee. So, there was kind of no man's land of whether an e-bike is a motor vehicle or a bicycle. And so we now regulate them like bicycles with different classes, and that's regulation similar to other states that have enacted that. So that's a good move in the right direction. There was a bill to support butcheries, small butcheries, which was a measure that, became a big issue last year during the pandemic when we had issues with our meat processing facilities and their inability to keep up. So we've got some things in place to support small butcheries now. I think that we need to do a lot more systemically to fix that system, but that was a move in the right direction. And that's about all I could come up with for the good stuff. So we'll switch over now, and not to dwell too much on the bad things, but it is very important. And it's very concerning to me, and who I am, what my values are, and that kind of thing, why I got into this type of work. So I have to be honest about these things. Tried to come up with a sort of a cutesy acronym or mnemonic to work my way through, and Code Red is what I came up with. So I'll try to make that work. It took a lot of massaging. So the C is for control, as in local control. We continue to see measures that take away local control for our local governments, cities, counties, school districts across the state, in ways that are very concerning. I just mentioned a couple. The 11th hour move, which was an amendment to an appropriations bill, so not the way we'd like to see policy enacted in this state, took away the ability of local governments to enact mask mandates. I think everybody knows about that. It was a purely partisan political move, created a lot of disruption and division in our school districts. With only 2 weeks of school left to go. There was really no need for it. It also hamstrings local governments for future pandemics. Once we get this thing really under control, we're concerned about what might be next. Section 8 housing vouchers. Some cities in the state have ordinances that require landlords to accept Section 8 housing vouchers. A bill was passed this year that takes away that ability for local governments to require landlords to accept Section 8 housing vouchers. When we have an affordable housing issue in the state, like we do in some communities, Section 8 is one way to provide affordable housing. And this is a hit at that. I work at the Center for Energy and Environmental Education at UNI. Environmental issues, climate issues are something I'm very passionate about. This seemed like an obscure thing to most people, I'd say, but it was a big issue for the environmental community. Had to do with natural gas hookups and whether or not local governments can regulate natural gas hookups at all. The bill took away that ability for local governments to do any sort of regulation of natural gas hookups. It essentially is a measure to protect the natural gas industry, methane and propane gas industries, because they see that the future is renewable energy, and our renewable energy is electricity, not natural gas. So the example I gave on the Senate floor was, what if a local government wanted to pass an ordinance that said that any new developments had to be all electric, basically, and require that they use heat pumps for heating, induction cooking ranges for cooking, electric hot water heaters, so that we can capitalize on our own renewable electricity here in this state. Local governments can no longer do that. We don't produce any natural gas here in the state of Iowa. It's all piped in, and our money that we pay for it is piped out of the state. So that's a bad measure. So those are a couple of things. So back to my code red, that was control. Red is rights. I'll go through these and then come back. Rights, education, and democracy. Those are the things I'm concerned about, RED. So for rights, as in taking away rights, as opposed to expanding our rights. So women's reproductive health care, there's been a big move over the last few years across the country to try to systematically put in place measures that could hope, on their side, eventually be used to overturn Roe v. Wade at the national level. There's also, if this constitutional amendment that's being proposed here in Iowa, it goes through, then it will pave the way for countless restrictions on abortion rights, women's reproductive rights here in the state. So that's a concern. Instead, we are enhancing penalty, and instead of expanding rights, we're enhancing penalties for protesters, folks who are gathering to peacefully protest. This issue really came to head last year with all of the protests that we've had across the state in the wake of the George Floyd murder, which for a moment we thought we were going to head in the right direction after that, and we've headed in the wrong direction. We've added permitless carry now so you can buy a handgun now without a permit. Doesn't matter what your background is on that. We've expanded immunity for gun manufacturers. That's a concern. We now have what's called qualified immunity for police officers. I try to always be clear with people that we support our public safety officers. I don't know of anybody in this state who is advocating for what is called defunding the police. Maybe we need to restructure what our police departments do and reimagine those kinds of things, but we're not for disbanding or abolishing police. But we moved in the direction of qualified immunity this time. We've reduced penalties for people who hit protesters with a car. So the types of rights that are being enacted are a step in the wrong direction, in my view. Education, I don't know if I'm leaving myself enough time here. So the red part was, the E was education. Pre-K through 12, we now have a charter school program that expands the ability across the state for charter schools to be started, which have no accountability to local school districts. I was a school board member before being elected to the Senate. I think our system of local governance of education is very important. These charter schools would not be accountable to local school districts.
Can I get you to run through, because I'm looking at the clock there?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Okay. The other thing, diversity plans. John, I appreciate you you mentioning diversity in the opening words here. The 5 school districts in the state that have voluntary diversity plans, which were in place to maintain a level of diversity in our school districts. are now gone. We know that 70, so far, the latest report is that 70 students have already applied to open enroll out of the Waterloo School District. And it is essentially white flight. It is students who have the means to go to another school district who are applying to leave. The accreditation process, another 11th hour move in the middle of the night without any public vetting. Accreditation process for our public school systems was radically changed. If I had 10 more minutes, I could talk that whole time on higher education and the target on our Regents universities. I know that's something that is very important to this crowd. We have in the community such close ties to you and I. Defunding last year, zero increase in dollars this year. It's going to equate to an increase in tuition and student debt. And adding to that, the banning of divisive, quote unquote, divisive concepts, which is aimed at critical race theory and curricula like the 1619 Project, which is, as we know, is a product of our community here. Right. What else? Let's see. The democracy piece, what I had in mind really was about restricting voting access. We've had a series of elections bills in the last couple of years. The one that passed this year shortens the early voting period to 20 days. Ballots must be received by election day. There are limits now on who can turn in a person's ballot, an absentee ballot. Big concern for our elderly community, trying to get those ballots in safely. And polls now will close at 8 p.m. instead of 9 p.m. And so I'll stop at that. That's a move, an anti-democratic move in the wrong direction. It's restricting access to the ballot instead of expanding it. We want more people to vote more easily.
You must have read Dennis Harbaugh's editorial in the paper this morning.
I saw it. I know Dennis is on the line. I saw it and I ran out of time. So I'm going to read it as soon as I get back. I'm excited to read it. I enjoyed the photo they had in the paper there for Dennis as well. If you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to.
Let's go with some questions.
Okay.
Okay, so if you have a question, if you would raise your hand in the participants panel and I will call on you. And also just a reminder, when we have somebody who is here representing a political, not only himself, but also representing a political party, we want to remember that he's expressing his views. And we also want to remember that as Unitarians, we want to encourage all views to be spoken. Okay, so, I'm not seeing anybody have a question. He answered all your questions. Oh, Mike has a question. I know what Mike's is about. Mike?
I bet you don't.
Oh.
Hey, my question for you, Eric, with regards to the state legislature and the governor pushing that bill through to for open carry or unregistered guns and that. Has there been given any thought to adding a fee to the purchase of handguns and maybe long rifles that would generate money for a victims fund for victims of violence or crime against them using a gun of some type?
That's a great idea, Mike. I don't remember if an amendment like that was offered. I will say that our caucus offered a number of amendments to that bill, and the way the game goes these days is that our amendments are either ruled non-germane right out of the gate, so we can't even get a vote on them, or they're voted down if there's no way that they can be considered non-germane. And so we're just not in a position right now to do anything like that. Best we can do is try to at least get a vote to show that the other side's not interested in that type of stuff.
I found it ironic that the governor signed the bill for handguns and a week later lowered the flag to half staff for the victims, the shooting victims in California.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's my political
It's
statement.
sad and disturbing.
Next question.
Carolyn Hildebrand.
You had planned to say something more about higher education. Was there something else you wanted to say?
Well, probably just to add more detail to it. I think the biggest concerns really are funding, and the idea. I mean, if you could zoom out a little bit, I think the idea that my friends across the aisle have is that our Regents universities, our public universities, are indoctrinating our young people with liberal ideology. And they don't feel the same way about our community colleges. We love our community colleges too. We need a full spectrum, full range of education options in this state. They are choosing winners and losers in this system. Community colleges got a funding increase of 3.1% this year over the previous year. That is what they requested. That's what they asked for. Regents universities asked for what they've planned for and asked for the last few years, which is 15 million, I believe, or something on that order for the three, and received zero increase. And it's not because we don't have money. The state has money to do these things. In fact, every year, money is left on the table. A lot of money is left on the table. It could be used to provide the services that we need for the state. So I think that's the biggest thing right there, is just not funding our Regents universities. But then there's also these attacks with the divisive concepts issue. That was a rewrite of one of President Trump's executive orders that was then kicked out later by the courts. It was unconstitutional. That basically says, it put if any sort of divisive concepts, including critical race theory, ideas that are included in the 1619 project, are a part of any diversity training programs or university curricula, then the state funding is in jeopardy at that point. So we're just, it's clear what's going on. And I think those two things are kind of my biggest concerns that came out of this legislative session.
We'll take one more question.
One more question, and that would be from Joan Taylor.
Hi, Eric. I was just
Hi.
interested you were talking about the changes in accreditation for schools. And I've been trying, I follow the legislative reports that come out because they affect me in teacher ed. And I was just curious, I haven't been able to figure out what those changes to accreditation were. I know there was some language around like regionally accredited schools versus something else. I don't know, but could you say just a little bit more about what that change was?
Yeah, actually, in the time we have, Joan, I wonder if I could send you some information
Sure.
that gives you more details about it.
Yep.
And I'll just point out the reason you don't know anything about it is because of the process that happened. This was a major policy change to our school accreditation system, a process that happened as an amendment to the Education Appropriations Bill. Had nothing to do with appropriations. It was a policy change, and it was inserted the week before the end of the session at 11 o'clock at night as an amendment. So had no subcommittee, no public hearing at all, no committee referral, and there it was as a part of our Ed Approps bill, which passed. All of these appropriations bills will pass because we have to have a state budget. So there it is. And that's why you don't know anything about it, but I'm happy to send you our staff's summary of those policy changes. And I'll make a note of that and do that.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all your work in this trying time. We appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you.
Eric will be around in the second hour and we can ask more questions of him and he can elaborate on some of these things.